Dr. Hemphill, faculty colleagues, students, family, granddaughter Elizabeth, and other distinguished guests. On this Founders Day, I intend to highlight a founding principle incorporated by our founders, nurtured by our faculty, and appropriated by our constituency. I've chosen to call it the missions motif. A motif is a dominant idea, a central theme which becomes an influence or stimulus prompting to action. It is my deep conviction, and the thesis really of this address, that Southwestern's dominant theme, its integrating idea, its energizing force has been and is the missions motif. This missions motif and its academic outrider, the formal study of missions in theological education, have not always been welcome in Protestant theological circles. The last half of the 19th century saw the formal study of missions emerge, but in a real struggle to justify its place in the classical theological curriculum. The first regular courses on missions offered anywhere were at Princeton Theological Seminary in 1836, but were discontinued after 3 years. Alexander Duff's chair of evangelistic theology was established in 1867 in New College, Edinburgh. It earned for Duff the title, the father of the study of missions in theological education. However, the high hopes of Duff, already an old man after 30 years in India, were never realized, and the chair he founded ceased to exist in 1909, about the time our seminary started. The scientific study of the Christian mission and its missions was considered to be an interesting but peripheral subject for occasional lecture series, not something to be included in the theological curriculum. In other words, missions needed theology, but theology did not need missiology. But in the case of our founders, the converse was true. Theological study sprang from missions praxis. A sense of mission present and implemented on their part needed a dosage of systematic theology to undergird and orient it. For them, missiology became the mother of theology, just as it had been in the early Christian centuries. In Southwestern's case, theological education was not a priori, but a posteriori. A perusal of our antecedents and of our origin reveals what I call the missions motif as our founding principle. But theological reflection was a needed corollary. Therefore, the formal study of missions rather naturally became an integral part of our first curriculum. This was due in part not only to the growing respectability of mission studies in classical theological education, but also in larger part to the Carver Southern Seminary paradigm. B.H. Carroll, as a Southern Seminary trustee from 1894 to 1911, and L.R. Scarborough, as a student at Southern for 1 year in 1899, were eyewitnesses of the founding of the chair of comparative religion and missions at Southern. It became the model, but not the principal motive, of the founders of Southwestern. A review of our history reveals the missions motif as the motor of the Southwestern movement, the raison d'etre of our seminary. For a few minutes, let's look at it as it was first incorporated by the founders, second, nurtured by our faculty, and third, appropriated by the constituency. Now, when I speak of founders in this address, I mean the Carroll-Scarborough tandem. It would be remiss to speak of one founder of Southwestern. B.H. Carroll and L.R. Scarborough were bonded into a leadership team years before the founding of Southwestern. In the pastorate, in fundraising, in evangelism, and in missions, they were already practitioners with a symbiotic relationship. You might say a theological, missiological Siamese twins. And their incorporation of a strong evangelistic missions motif in the new seminary was much more than an emulation of the Carver Southern syndrome. It added a populist ingredient to the classical menu. For the Carroll-Scarborough tandem, the founding of Southwestern was a fulfillment of a divine mission, an errand to the wilderness, if you please. Southwestern would be a theological agency teaching and practicing missions in a great mission field, a place where frontier preachers and missionaries, as well as promising scholars, would be prepared for evangelistic mission while on mission. It was this approach which later evoked the rather caustic comment of another seminary president. And I quote, "If you want a theological education, go to Southern. If you want a 3-year camp meeting, go to Southwestern." I never have known exactly how to take that, whether it's a compliment or not. The Carroll-Scarborough tandem brought this missions motif not as an erstwhile academic discipline for theological reflection, but as a guiding principle for dynamic evangelistic mission to the world. Their denominational expertise was harnessed to create a lively theological community motored by evangelistic mission, a unique heritage upheld in different ways by subsequent presidents, Head, Williams, Naylor, Dilday, and Hemphill. Both founders were autodidacts with reference to theological education. Both had keen minds and super intellects, but neither finished a theological degree. The precocious Carroll, an avid reader with a surprising knowledge of classical erudition, entered Baylor as a junior, but left for military service before he finished. Scarborough finished bachelor degrees at Baylor and at Yale, preparing to be a lawyer, but spent only 1 year at Southern before returning to the pastorate. He claimed his theological education was acquired from the sermons of Carroll while he was at Baylor. Theirs was a theology of the road, not of the balcony, a theology from below, a theology of mission. Carroll was early exposed to the growing interest in foreign missions by association. He was a lifelong friend of William Buck Bagby, the Baptist pioneer in Brazil, and Z.N. Morrow, the old Indian fighter, venerable missionary to Texas. Bagby was Carroll's first pupil in the new Department of Theology at Waco University in the 1870s, now Baylor. He often said, and I quote, "Yes, Dr. Carroll and I founded the seminary. He was the faculty, I was the student body," end quote. When Bagby needed $1,000 to underwrite his appointment to Brazil, Carroll ordered him to supply for him in Waco while he toured the Texas associations and raised the money. Bagby, after 45 years of labor in Brazil, pronounced a discourse before the Brazilian Convention in 1926, in which he referred to the universality of Carroll's philosophy. And I quote, "In a conversation I had with my great friend and teacher, Dr. B.H. Carroll, during his last days, I related some of my experiences in Brazil in which God had directed me in marvelous ways. After listening carefully, the elder Carroll exclaimed, 'Oh, Bagby, the most sublime theme of all my study has been the providential hand of God in the history of the nations,' end quote. Carroll also worked closely with the former Confederate General A.T. Hawthorne, who had become the agent of the Foreign Mission Board in Texas, who had recruited the Bagbys. He was a close friend of Z.C. Taylor, the second Texas foreign missionary to Brazil, and later Carroll's own daughter, Kate, served 2 years as a missionary in Brazil. Rufus Burleson, who had come to Texas in 1848 as a home missionary. It was Burleson, then president of Baylor at Independence, who became Carroll's mentor after his post-Civil War conversion. He involved him in denominational life, which resulted in his being called to the First Baptist Church in Waco. Thus, all of Carroll's mentors had been missionaries. From this platform, Carroll dedicated his talents to denominational evangelism and missions. He led his church to start Mission Points. It contributed 1/3 of all the home, foreign, and state missions money that was being given by Texas churches at that time. From his church came many volunteers for the foreign mission fields. While a pastor, Carroll on 2 occasions took a furlough from his church to defend the mission boards of the SBC. In the early 90s, the Foreign Mission Board was accosted by the gospel mission movement, a product of earlier landmarkism. T.P. Crawford, a veteran missionary from China, led the movement and demanded the dissolution of the Foreign Mission Board. Carroll asked for a summer's leave from the church in which he toured Texas, exposing the vagary and raising funds for the Foreign Mission Board. As a result, the impact of the movement subsided. This opposition to anti-missionism among Baptists probably inspired Carroll's son, B.H. Carroll Jr., to publish his doctoral dissertation entitled The Genesis of American Anti-Missionism in 1902. It chronicles the eras of anti-missionism and extols the contributions of the foreign missions enterprise to church development and theological education in the United States. Very interesting document. Surely the influence of B.H. Sr. is reflected in this noble defense of the foreign missionary enterprise. In 1888, the existence of the Home Mission Board was threatened by hostile regionalism in the Southern Baptist Convention resulting from the Civil War. Carroll's eloquent address before the SBC, using many of his debate skills and his folksy metaphors, tremendous in that, turned the tables, and the Home Mission Board was salvaged. For instance, he forcefully stated these words, "Brethren, when God converted me from infidelity, he made me a missionary. My heart is in it. May that heart stop its beatings when it fails to love any man from any shore who is a child of God. The battles that defend our home should be fought on the frontier and not around our firesides. And I say to you that when you lose Texas and the Trans-Mississippi, you lose the SBC. Texas is your gateway to Mexico. By this principle, let Texas as a field of missionary operations be tried. Tongues of missionary fire rest on it. Brethren, let us have reciprocity." Carroll's tenure as a Southern Seminary trustee and his study of the format of Spurgeon's College in England, with its strong involvement in world missions, prepared him to move from the role of a denominational pastor to that of president of a pioneer missionary seminary. L.R. Scarborough, the other half of this founding tandem, was cut from the Carroll mold. A rugged, swashbuckling cowboy, Scarborough was converted through the ministry of Carroll. He was formally educated at Baylor and Yale and was practically majorated through pastorates at Cameron and Abilene, Texas. His bonding with Carroll developed as he fulfilled his promise to his father to hear B.H. Carroll preach every Sunday while at Baylor. Baylor and Carroll had much to offer the young cowboy. He excelled in his liberal arts studies and spent 1 year at Southern Seminary under the likes of E.Y. Mullins, A.T. Robertson, W.O. Carver, and J.R. Sampy. He appreciated Southern's teaching, but it was not Southern that grounded Scarborough in Baptist theology. His theological education came directly from Carroll. In 1901, Scarborough became pastor of the First Baptist Church in Abilene. Here his missions motif first exhibited itself. He led his church to start 2 other churches. He was a church planter before we even used that term. And as H.E. Dana later wrote, his policy as a pastor was to press the great missionary and denominational causes. Simmons College, now Hardin-Simmons, was financially hard-pressed. Scarborough threw himself into the support of the struggling school. This revealed his amazing qualities as a promoter. While Scarborough labored in Abilene, the aging Carroll had his dream about a future Southwestern Seminary while traveling on a train through West Texas in 1905, a dream that led him to resign his church, abandon his plans for a comfortable retirement, overcome several almost insurmountable problems, and found Southwestern in 1908 on the Baylor campus. It is significant that highly qualified academicians were selected by Carroll as the core of the new faculty. Among them, A.H. Newman, Calvin Goodspeed, J.J. Reeve, Jeff D. Ray, and Charles Williams. These erudites brought academic respectability to the frontier school, but Carroll was quick to incorporate, with a view to perpetuate, his own missions motif by persuading L.R. Scarborough, a theological unknown, to be professor of evangelism and to occupy the projected chair of fire, the first chair of evangelism ever created in a seminary curriculum. The bonding of these two giants produced the founding principle of Southwestern: biblical theology at the service of evangelistic mission, a future seedbed for world mission. The founders were careful to assemble a faculty which could and would nurture the missions motif. In one sense, all professors were propagators of it while they taught their particular disciplines, and I should say a characteristic which endures to this very day in our faculty. Besides the customary degrees offered by most seminaries, Carroll insisted on conferring certificates and diplomas relative to instruction in the Woman's Training School and the Missionary Training School. These were incorporated into the original charter of Southwestern. At the heart of the practical curriculum was Carroll's special 4-year degree in English Bible. By offering this degree, Carroll attempted to avoid what he considered to be the mistake of English and Northern Baptist schools, to major on producing literary scholars rather than practitioner pupils. He explained, and I quote, "The degree of English Bible will be profound exposition of the whole Bible, so that the preacher, though not a classical scholar, may as the man of one book be able to teach all of God's word with power. If he is right in his heart and life, truly called of God to preach, so equipped he will be a good and able minister of Jesus Christ, though he possess no other school education whatever." And then he ends it like this: "And these are the men needed for the masses of mankind." Both Carroll and Scarborough continued as faculty members during their presidentships. Carroll jealously guarded his beloved English Bible classes, even to the point of firing A.H. Newman and J.J. Reeve when they tried to replace it. And Scarborough continued to teach evangelism in his cherished chair of fire. It was their way of maintaining the missions motif at the center of the curriculum, but also the center of the administration. At first, the formal study of missions was somewhat overshadowed by the general missionary bent of all instruction, something I'm proud to say exists to this day. But formal missions courses were offered, usually taught by professors from other fields. The first 3 years, they were taught by the colorful Jeff D. Ray, the original professor of homiletics. They majored on the comparative study of religions and the history of foreign missions, following the pattern set by W.O. Carver at Southern, where Ray had studied. The first Friday of each month, classes were dismissed, and students were required to attend missionary, evangelistic, and Sunday school day. A brief historical overview of the missions department demonstrates how the founders depended on this professorship to help them nurture the missions motif. It also shows the gradual paradigm shift from the Carver Southern model, with its emphasis on religions and history, to a fusion of this classical model with the missions motif of the Carroll-Scarborough tandem. 4 periods are patent, and let me mention them briefly. First, a formative period from 1911 to 1919. The first full-time missions professor who initiated the gradual shift into a chair of missions was Charles T. Ball. Ball, a native of North Carolina, a graduate of Wake Forest, and a THM graduate of Southern Seminary, had been closely associated with Scarborough in Abilene, where he served as the dean of the Bible department at Simmons College from 1904 to 1911. Largely unknown today and strangely neglected in our history, Ball made significant contributions to the missions motif of Southwestern from 1911 to 1919. Implementing the desire of Carroll and Scarborough to extend theological education to a wider market, Ball organized and assisted the development of an extension department to reach students unable to attend the resident courses. He visited many college campuses and recognized the need to involve Baptist students in the interdenominational student volunteer movement, then in its heyday. At the SBC in Nashville in 1914, Ball assembled a group of leaders and proposed the organization of the Baptist Student Missionary Movement. With the hearty endorsement of leaders like E.Y. Mullins, W.O. Carver, and L.R. Scarborough, a constitutional conference was held right here in Fort Worth in November of 1914, and the movement was organized. Reflecting Ball's vision, the original territory of the movement was the North American continent, Canada, USA, and Mexico. Ball was the general secretary. This national movement, emanating from our missions department, for several years marshaled hundreds of students for home and foreign missions. Scarborough gave Ball his full support and even authored several of the promotional pieces of the movement. 3 student conventions were held between 1914 and 1917, 2 in Fort Worth and the 3rd in Louisville, attended by more than 500 students. The Baptist Student Magazine was initiated, and literature promoting home and foreign mission vocation was circulated among Baptist schools. State organizations of Baptist students were rapidly formed. However, in 1920, due to the growing financial indebtedness of the movement and the desire of the SBC to have its own student program, the SBC withdrew. The indebtedness and the direction of the original organization were assumed by the mission boards of the SBC, and this gave birth to the Baptist Student Union, the BSU. Charles Ball elected to stay with a more ecumenical northern group, subsequently called the American Baptist Student Union. He resigned his professorship at Southwestern in 1919. Frank Level became the director of the new Baptist Student Union. Ball deserves a larger place in Baptist history. After leaving the Northern Union in 1925, he returned to a pastorate in Philadelphia, where he turned his dynamic energies toward the establishment of a Baptist seminary in that city, which later became the Eastern Baptist Theological Seminary, with Ball as its first president. A decade later, he helped found Arlington University in Virginia, which featured extension university work, similar to what he had done here at Southwestern. He died in 1943 and is buried close by in Crowley, Texas. A second period, the passive period from 1919 to 1939. During this time, the missions motif of Southwestern was maintained mainly by the visionary leadership of President Scarborough and nurtured by a cadre of part-time missions professors who taught in the theology school and the woman's school of missionary training. Scarborough's role in the 75 million campaign rescued the SBC mission boards from bankruptcy and gave birth to the cooperative program. Perhaps this was his greatest contribution. In 1925, the same year of the inauguration of the cooperative program, Southwestern broke its Texas State Convention ties and became an SBC institution. This widened its missions vision and heightened its responsibility to provide missionary personnel. During these volatile years of denominational controversy and financial depression, the formal teaching of missions fell into the hands of outstanding graduate students, furloughing foreign missionaries, and senior professors from other departments, such as W.W. Barnes, professor of church history and former missionary to Cuba. W.H. Knight, a native of Louisiana and graduate of Louisiana Baptist College, finished his Ph.D. in 1919, and the trustees appointed him to the chair of missions. Knight was Scarborough's type of man, a gifted preacher and an ardent evangelist. He taught until 1923 and was aided in 1922 by R.T. Bryan, a veteran missionary to China on furlough. During his second tenure, Knight also served as Scarborough's assistant in the Department of Evangelism. In 1931, he became pastor of the Tabernacle Baptist Church of Atlanta, Georgia, where he gained national distinction by baptizing more persons than any other pastor in the nation. He ended his career as Secretary-Treasurer of the Louisiana State Convention. W.R. White assumed the chair of missions in 1923 and served for 4 years while doing his doctoral work. During White's tenure, Mr. and Mrs. George W. Bottoms of Texarkana, Arkansas, gave $75,000 to endow a professorship of missions, now called the Bottoms Chair of Missions, a title which has caused this incumbent some derision by colleagues in the faculty lounge from time to time. White resigned in 1927 and went on to pastor some of the outstanding churches of Texas. He retired in 1961 after terms as president of Hardin-Simmons and then of Baylor. During the period 1928-1934, the difficult years of the Depression, Albert Venning, a gifted graduate student who had become the first professor of philosophy of religion in 1925, filled in as missions professor. Venning was a true orchestra man whose range of teaching, Bible, theology, philosophy, ethnic religions, missions, music, hymnology, revealed his comprehensive grasp of human thought and divine truth. L.R. Eliot said about him, Venning understood the mind of the European, the Slav, the Asiatic, the Muslim, as well as the mind of the American. The last of the part-time professors was Baker James Cawthon, later to become Mr. Foreign Missions of the Southern Baptist Convention. Cawthon, a brilliant student and eloquent preacher, had a B.A. from Stephen F. Austin, an M.A. from Baylor, where he became a Browning Scholar under the tutelage of the Venerable A.J. Armstrong. On finishing his Ph.D. at Southwestern, he was invited by Scarborough to fill the chair of missions, while at the same time pastoring the Polytechnic Baptist Church, one of Fort Worth's largest churches. As he taught missions and preached missions, foreign missions became his calling. And in 1939, he and his M.K. wife, Eloise, departed for China and an illustrious foreign missions career. The prophetic period from 1939 to 1982. Now, time restraints and plus our limited historical distance or perspective allow only a cursory look at this significant period in the history of our missions department. A period dominated by three professors, Frank K. Means, Calvin Guy, and Jack Gray. These three, through teaching and practice, not only maintained the missions motif, but gradually converted the study of missions into productive scientific reflection. The frequency of faculty changes had seriously hampered the growth of a developing philosophy of mission. But under the guidance of these professors, classical and practical mission study became a reality. The study of missions became scientific missiology. Frank Means, professor of missions from 1939 to 1946, was a native of Missouri, a graduate of Oklahoma Baptist University and Southwestern with THM and THD degrees. Means, shortly before he went to the Foreign Mission Board as director of the Department of Missionary Promotion and Education in 1946, wrote an incisive critique of the missions department, which included suggested reforms which his successors have tried to implement. This incumbent had the privilege of serving 17 years under Means while he was area secretary for Latin America. Calvin Guy, because of his long tenure, his probing critiques of SBC missions philosophy, his sometimes irascible personality, his highly emotional missions appeals, his espousal of revolutionary mission philosophy such as those of John L. Nevius, Roland Allen, Donald McGavran, and his strong emphasis on personal evangelism deserves to be called the dean of all the above-mentioned professors of missions and of those who now exist. Perhaps he's been the most conscientious and sometimes the most contentious guardian of the Carroll Scarborough missions motif. He incarnated some of Carroll, a lot of Scarborough, and a measure of Means. It is ironic that Guy, for many years, a principal critic of the general policies of the Foreign Mission Board, while at the same time its principal recruiter of mission volunteers, is now in his retirement years an active member of that Foreign Mission Board in its time of restructuring. Interesting. Jack Gray graciously and patiently served with Guy as professor of missions from 1956 to 1984. A godly man of prayer, in piety, Gray brought a dimension of spiritual depth to the missions department, which has spawned popular and needed courses on spiritual preparation and prayer. The practitioner period, the last, from 1982 to the present. Since 1974 and the revival too, of this incumbent, the missions department has been made up of professors who have come to their position from long years of foreign and home mission service. None of the above-mentioned professors had served as field missionaries. This was Robert Naylor's innovation, continued by Russell Dale and up to now Ken Hemphill, a conviction that missions professors should complement academic credentials with own field experience. With the luxury of multiple professors and in a spirit of camaraderie, the missions department incumbents have been able to create an ample curriculum to meet the needs of the day. The present department, counting on the continued support of the whole faculty, is committed to the task of maintaining the missions motif as the predominant theme of our theological institution. The missions motif of Southwestern has been appropriated also by our constituency. Our missions principle has been a catalyst to our denomination. A look at some of the specific contributions of our missions motif is a fitting way to close this address. 1, The cooperative way of doing and supporting missions emanated from the Carroll Scarborough emphasis called by Glenn Carson the new denominationalism. It eschewed the independent and society methods and rallied SBC churches around the cooperative missions flag. 2, the Baptist Student Union, so significant for missions, sprang directly from our missions department through the innovative work of Charles T. Ball. The BSU today would do well to recall its missionary heritage and origin. 48 years of significant student missions conferences here at Southwestern also was spawned by this emphasis. 3, the provision of key leadership for the missions agencies and institutions of the SBC. Practically all the recent leaders of our mission boards have been our graduates, plus about 50% of our home and foreign missionaries have studied under Southwestern professors. 4, the introduction into SBC missions philosophy of the McGavran church growth philosophy, gradually, prophetically, and painfully at times by Calvin Guy. For many years, as a voice in the wilderness, Guy instilled these principles in the future leaders of SBC missions, including our present missions professors. Although adapted by them to SBC ecclesiology and constructively criticized, this emphasis has resulted in a missionary enterprise with the founder's missionary motif at its very heart. 5, the strong emphasis on the Holy Spirit's role in missions and the imperative of spiritual preparation of missionaries rose from the example and ministry of Jack Gray with the support of the evangelism department. 6, the creation of the World Missions Center with its foreign missions emphasis and the Scarborough Institute with its home missions emphasis both have arisen from our missions motif. In short, theological education with the missions motif as its integrating center has been, and I hope continues to be, the hallmark of Southwestern Seminary. On this Founders Day, and in the light especially of our present convention controversy, the words of E.Y. Mullins constitute the desire of our founders and of this speaker, and I think they provide a fitting way to close this address. And I quote, and listen carefully. Dr. Mullins says, "If the intense loyalty of Southern Baptists to doctrine could be enlisted also in the cause of worldwide evangelization, there would be scarcely a limit to their ultimate power in this direction, while doctrinal interest would not suffer, and unity would follow as a choice fruit of the increased power of love toward Christ and men," end quote. And so I say, long live the missions motif.